Good day, scholars. Welcome to American Revolution, lesson number 6. Our objectives for today. We will hear about Parliament and King George III's plan to pay for the French and Indian War, and we will identify additional events that build the colonists' frustrations. When we last left off, I left you with a final thought at the end of that last lesson. Fighting a war is very expensive for a country, and Great Britain, you'll remember, spent a lot of money to win the French and Indian War. Today, we will find out some of what Great Britain did to try to pay off that debt, that money owed that they had borrowed for the war. Our story begins with King George III. Remember him? Elected king in 1760 and inherited a 130 million pound debt? Well, that war put him in even more debt. So our story begins today with him drawing a line along the top of the Appalachian Mountains, making a proclamation known as the Proclamation of 1763, the year he made it, that said until further notice, no colonists could live west of that line. Here you're seeing that red line that ran across the top of the Appalachian Mountains. Well, scholars, this was very frustrating for the colonists who had helped Great Britain win that land from France in the French and Indian War. They couldn't believe they had helped win land that they were now not being allowed to settle on. Why in the world would this be? They wondered. Well, here's why. As I have mentioned, fighting a war is very expensive. The French and Indian War had just ended, and King George III was worried that the Native American people, the indigenous people who were already living on that land, would be angry if colonists were now allowed to move there, to live there. And he was worried that those indigenous people, the Indian people living there, would start a fight, a war with Great Britain. Well, he did not want another war. He just got out of a war and owed a lot of money from that war. So he made the Proclamation of 1763, saying that no colonists could live west of the Appalachian Mountains. Boom, he thought. Problem solved. Well, not quite true. His problems were not solved. Yes, King George III avoided angering the indigenous native people already living on that land, but in turn, he angered his own colonists. They were very frustrated by his proclamation. But the king took it even another step. He also announced, as a part of his proclamation, that thousands of British troops would be stationed along the frontier line to keep peace between the colonists and the indigenous native people. Well, to the colonists, this seemed more like it was actually soldiers who were put there to watch them and stop them from crossing over the mountains, not as a way to keep any peace. And then something even bigger angered the colonists, also stemming from the French and Indian War. To help pay for the debt, the cost of that war, and to pay for the troops who were now being stationed along the mountain frontier, Parliament passed a law that colonists should pay taxes on certain goods that they were importing. Remember, importing means you're buying them from elsewhere and having them brought to your land. Well, to make sure that the colonists would be paying taxes, the British government sent even more officials to the colonies to make sure that the taxes were being paid. Two important imports that were being taxed: sugar and molasses, both being brought in from the West Indies. Remember the Caribbean islands. Lots of sugar and molasses was being brought to the colonies. The king and parliament thought this was a great opportunity to collect tax money from the colonists for that sugar and molasses they were having brought in. And listen to this: these officials were allowed to enter and search colonists' homes and businesses without permission. They could search to see if you had been smuggling in goods like sugar and molasses. Smuggling in means you were sneaking them in and hiding them and not paying taxes on them. They could search your home to see if you had hidden sugar and molasses without getting any kind of warrant or writ allowing them to search. Do you remember those rights of Englishmen we learned about earlier? Well, one of those rights was that the government could not just show up and search your home or business whenever it felt like it, that they had to get permission from a judge, and the judge had to agree to the government making the search. Well, the colonists of Great Britain just found out that the British government was not honoring this right of Englishmen with the colonists. Their very own country was now showing up whenever it wanted and doing a search. Oh, they were quite angry about this. And Parliament came up with yet another way to pay for the war and to squeeze money from the colonists to get it paid for. There were now thousands of British soldiers in the colonies. To help pay for them being there, Parliament passed the Quartering Act. The Quartering Act was a law that required the colonial governments to furnish quarters, that is, places to live, and not the coin, places to live called quarters for all these troops. The Quartering Act also angered the colonists, who felt like the soldiers were there to make sure they were paying their taxes, to not go over the Appalachian Mountains, to obey all these harsh new laws that were being set by Parliament and by King George III. Oh, they were getting very angry. And scholars, that is where we're going to stop for today. Our next lesson will find Parliament and King George III making another, yes, another big, bold step that really gets things rolling. The frustrations and anger of the colonists is really just beginning. Now, a quick full disclosure with this picture: the colonists were not really gathering together with torches and pitchforks, but they were definitely feeling very frustrated and angry. And soon they will be banding together and working together to try to bring about change. Let's check in on those objectives for today. We heard about Parliament and King George III's plan to pay for the French and Indian War, right? His proclamation, the Quartering Act, the act to collect taxes on sugar and molasses, for example. All of that's meant to help pay for the debt of the war. And scholars, we identified additional events that built the colonists' frustrations. Those same things, right? The proclamation that they couldn't live west of the Appalachian Mountains, the tax now being collected on sugar and molasses, the fact that government officials could now search your home or business without permission, and the passing of the Quartering Act, that they had to pay for and provide quarters, places to live for all these soldiers. Uh, the frustrations are definitely mounting. And now, scholars, for your assignment. Open the attached Google form and answer the questions about today's lesson. Remember, you may look back at the lesson, listen to information again, look at the videos slides again. When you're finished, click that submit button at the bottom of the form. Send those answers to your teacher. Good luck, scholars, and thanks for following along with another history lesson.